On May 14, 2024, the WNBA changed forever. Most people will tell you it changed because of a box score, or maybe because of the 2.1 million people who tuned in to watch a rookie's debut, shattering a 23-year-old viewership record in a single night. However, if you ask the players on the court, they'll tell you the league changed because, for the first time in 28 years, the gold standard was no longer about who had the most rings. It was about who had the most gravity. This is a story of how the WNBA tried to survive the Caitlin Clark effect, and how in the process, the treatment she endured actually became the catalyst that forced the league to finally grow up.
They always succeeded. They were amazing, and just really thankful to be able to come back here and appreciate this place and these fans.
Understanding Clark's treatment. You've seen the clips, the blindside hits, the welcome to the league moments that looked more like a defensive line drill than a basketball play. By the time the 2024 season wrapped, the narrative was set in stone. The WNBA veterans hate Caitlin Clark. But here's the thing about narratives. They're usually built on a foundation of half-truths. To understand the treatment of Caitlin Clark, you have to look past the Twitter clips and the talking heads. You have to understand that what we witnessed wasn't just a hazing of a rookie, it was a massive, high-stakes collision between a league that had spent 3 decades fighting for air and a one-woman oxygen tank that arrived with a $28 million Nike deal before she even hit her first layup. So, was Clark targeted? Yes. Was it personal? Sometimes. But the reality is far more complex than a simple story of jealousy. The Jordan Rules 2.0. To understand why Caitlin Clark spent her rookie season picking herself up off the hardwood, you have to understand the Jordan Rules. In the late 80s, the Detroit Pistons realized they couldn't outplay Michael Jordan, so they decided to out-hit him. The strategy was simple. If he's in the air, put him on the ground. It wasn't just a defensive scheme, it was a psychological tax. 35 years later, the WNBA accidentally wrote its own version, but the Clark rules weren't just about physicality. They were about mathematics. When a player can pull up from 30 feet, the standard defensive playbook goes out the window. If you give her 3 inches of space at half court, the possession is already over. So, WNBA veterans did what any elite competitor would do. They took away the space. They picked her up at 94 feet from the hoop. They used tactical physicality, bumping her off her spots, hand-checking her across the timeline, and making every single dribble feel like a war of attrition. In the beginning, it worked. Clark broke the record for turnovers in a debut, and then the record for turnovers in a season. The treatment looked like it was breaking her. Critics called it hazing. Veterans called it the scouting report. But here's the uncomfortable truth that the hazing narrative misses. The hardest hits didn't come because she was a rookie. They came because she was a threat. You don't double team a player you don't respect. You don't risk a flagrant foul on someone who doesn't matter. Every hip check and every full court press was a backhanded compliment, a recognition that if they didn't chunk up the game, as NBA legend Paul Pierce put it, she would dismantle them. They were trying to protect their own territory. For decades, the WNBA was a league defined by grit and paying your dues. Clark arrived with a shortcut to stardom, and the treatment was the league's way of asking, are you willing to bleed for this? As it turns out, she was. The uncomfortable truths. If this were just about basketball, the conversation would have ended with the box score. But by mid-summer 2024, Caitlin Clark had ceased to be just a point guard. She had become a Rorschach test for the American culture war. This is a double standard that ignited the flame. When Clark did it, she was called a cold-blooded competitor. When Reese did it, she was called classless. This wasn't just sports talk. It was a collision of race, identity, and privilege. The WNBA is a league built on the backs of black women who played in the shadows for decades. When a white superstar from Iowa suddenly became the face of that league, it created a friction that no amount of marketing could smooth over. On one side, you had a new wave of fans, many of whom had never watched a minute of WNBA ball, claiming Clark was being persecuted by a league of envious veterans. On the other side, you had players and longtime fans pointing out that the media was finally giving a white woman the main character energy it had denied black legends like A'ja Wilson for years. To her credit, Clark didn't take the bait. In a 2024 interview, she admitted, "As a white person, there is privilege. This league has been built on black players." But while she tried to block out the noise was deafening. The WNBA was forced to launch a no space for hate policy as a discourse turned toxic. Fans weren't just cheering for their teams anymore. They were using Clark as a proxy to debate everything from woke culture to racism. And then the physical toll became undeniable. In 2025, the treatment met a biological reality. After playing nearly 100 games straight without a break from the Iowa Hawkeyes to the Indiana Fever, Clark's body finally revolted. A quad strain in May, a groin injury in June, and finally, a season-ending injury in July. Critics said the league had finally broken her. Others said she was a one-trick pony who had been figured out. But as the arenas stayed packed and the TV ratings stayed high, even with Clark on the sidelines, a new truth began to emerge. The treatment hadn't destroyed Caitlin Clark. It had just been the brutal, public, and necessary birth pains of a league that was finally being taken seriously. By September 4, 2025, the noise finally stopped. After a relentless 18 months of basketball, from the NCAA tournament to the WNBA playoffs, to a nagging quad strain and finally a season-ending groin injury, Caitlin Clark's body did what the rest of the league couldn't. It forced her to slow down. For her critics, this was the "I told you so" moment. They argued that the physicality of the WNBA had finally broken the golden goose. But if you look at the reality of 2025, you'll see that while Clark was in the sidelines, the treatment had already done its job. And no, I don't mean the injuries, I mean the transformation. Look at the receipts. In 2024, the Clark effect was a curiosity. In 2025, it became the standard. The league that once made its players fly commercial and wait in TSA lines alongside tourists is now a full charter flight league, a $25 million annual investment that Clark's arrival made mandatory for player safety. The media rights deal that was once an afterthought? It's now a $2.2 billion blockbuster involving Disney, Amazon, and NBC, ensuring the league will be in more households over the next decade than it was in the previous 3 combined. The truth behind the treatment of Caitlin Clark isn't that the veterans were villains, or that the media was biased, or that the fans were toxic. The truth is that Caitlin Clark was a stress test. She was the stress test for the league's infrastructure, which had to grow overnight to handle her fame. She was a stress test for the veterans' pride, forcing them to defend their legacy against a rookie with a Nike contract larger than their entire team's salary cap. And she was a stress test for the game itself, stretching the floor until the very definition of defense had to be rewritten. Right now, the question isn't whether Caitlin Clark will be treated differently when she returns. The question is whether we've finally realized that the hard fouls and the heated debates weren't signs of a league in trouble. They were the sound of a league finally becoming a powerhouse. Caitlin Clark didn't just survive the NBA, she made the NBA survive its own growth. And in the end, that might be the most important record she ever breaks. So, When we look back at this era 10 years from now, we don't remember the box scores or the specific hard fouls. We'll remember it was the moment the WNBA stopped asking for a seat at the table and started owning the room. Caitlin Clark took the hits so the league could take the lead. But I want to hear from you. Was the treatment just part of the game, or did the league take it too far? Drop a comment below. And if you want more deep dives into the stories changing the face of sports, hit that like button, share this video with a friend who still thinks the WNBA is boring, and subscribe to join the conversation. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.